While Congress bickers over extending the payroll tax cut, President Obama has another significant piece of legislation on his desk. It's the National Defense Authorization Act, and it contains more than $660 billion in federal defense spending. The bill does not just fund the military. It includes new sanctions on Iran and freezes $700 million that was set aside for Pakistan. However, the bill was held up in Congress until last week over a provision that gives the federal government power to arrest and detain terror suspects indefinitely. And it's that part of the bill that has angered human rights activists and caused some conservative and liberal lawmakers to unite against it. For more this morning, we are joined by Annmarie McAvoy. She is a law professor at Fordham University and a former federal prosecutor. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, there are critics of this legislation that say you should give the government the power to arrest American citizens, yes, and hold them without charging them. Now, you've looked at this bill. Is that the way to do it, to have the government have that kind of power?
Well, there are two sides to that issue. One is that if we look at it that we are truly at war and we are at risk of being attacked by terrorists and so on, then if you look at them as enemy combatants and people at war with us, even if they're U.S. citizens, then that would justify holding them, and sometimes without bringing charges against them. But as Americans, I think a lot of us, and this has united people on the right and the left, feel very uncomfortable of having a law that allows the government to hold someone indefinitely without bringing any charges, without any safeguards on it. I think a lot of us would feel a lot better if there were at least some sort of safeguards that would give people the ability to come before some sort of judge or some sort of military tribunal at some point to at least make sure the charges against them are valid and there's enough to hold them indefinitely.
How are you going to determine if somebody is a military combatant, though?
Well, and that's the thing, too. The law doesn't set out who exactly is a military combatant, and it's a very murky law, which also then doesn't set out the specifics as to how you figure this out. So it's going to be left to somebody's judgment in the government as to who is an enemy combatant, who should be held indefinitely without bringing charges against them, and so on. So again, I think as Americans we feel very uncomfortable giving someone that power, and that person has no judicial review over that decision that they make then.
Now, my understanding is this bill gives the military the authority to handle the terror suspects and capture them inside the United States. Why would you not have the FBI or local police, for that matter, do that?
From what I could see of the legislation, again, it looks like a murky area. Certainly, if they're foreigners, they're supposed to be held by the military as opposed to by our own government agents who would normally hold them, such as the FBI or any other agency, even if it's on American soil. This is going to lead to problems, but the legislation also says that this doesn't take away any of the powers that federal law enforcement would normally have. So they still can go ahead and do everything they can do, but there's going to certainly, from what it sounds like, be problems with the fact of who's going to handle this. Is it going to be the military? Is it going to be the FBI? If the FBI picks them up, do they have to turn them over right away to the military?
Certainly a gray area.
It sounds very confusing the way this is set up, and it's going to be up to the Attorney General then as to whether these people, even if they're held by the military, whether they get tried then in a military tribunal or in a federal court. So you could have somebody picked up by the FBI, then held by the military, then turned back over to the FBI for a regular federal court trial. I mean, it's a mess. It's certainly not
a dilemma there.
It is, and the other issue that it brings up is when you're arrested under these circumstances, nobody knows how they're going to get handled. It's going to be up to somebody's discretion, as in the Attorney General's office, whether they go military or through the federal court system, and whether the FBI is handling them or whether they stay with the military. It makes it very difficult. You like to have laws where people know if they're arrested, this is what's going to happen to them.
Well, there are some who have said that this isn't really a new law, that the Supreme Court has already ruled on the matter. So if that is the case, what does it mean if the president signs it into a bill? Well,
essentially what it does is it codifies what the Supreme Court already did in large part, but it makes it also more, in a way, it makes it more confusing, because in a way, you knew what you had under the Hamdi case, which is what the Supreme Court, the case in which the Supreme Court ruled that they could have indefinite detention of the enemy combatants. But here now, it just muddies the waters. It says, you know, the military versus, you know, the federal people taking these foreigners into custody and giving officially the Attorney General the discretion then as to where they're going to be tried and so on. I think these are they're very difficult questions, and they're questions that everybody would like an answer to. If you hold enemy combatants, what procedures are you going to use as to how long you're going to have them there and so on. That's what I think people would like to see in legislation.
Well, what is it about this legislation that would bring someone like Senator Rand Paul, who embodies the Tea Party, together with a Democrat like Dianne Feinstein?
Well, I think just by nature as Americans, nobody likes to hear that American citizens can be held indefinitely without any charges against them, without anybody reviewing that decision, based on someone's discretion within the government that they are essentially a risk to the government or to our country. That doesn't sit well with us as Americans, be we staunch conservatives or liberals. It doesn't matter. That's something that just goes so against our grain as Americans. And I think that's one of the problems with this legislation. They need to have some safeguards in there to make sure it's not abused.
Well, it seems like the president he signaled that he is going to sign this bill, but hasn't happened yet. Annmarie McAvoy, thank you so much for being with us this morning.